He translates classic, modern, and contemporary Bengali fiction and non-fiction into English, and English fiction, non-fiction, and poetry into Bengali. 81 of his translations have been published so far, twice the winner of the Crossword Translation Award for Sankar's Chaurangi in 2007 and Anita Agnihotri 17 in 2011, and the winner of the Muse India Translation Award in 2013 for Buddhadeva Bose's When the Time is Right. He has also been shortlisted for the Independent Foreign Fiction Prize in 2009 for his translation of Chaurangi and for the Global Literature in Libraries Initiative Translated YA Book Prize for his translation of Mohammad Zafar Iqbal's Rasha, and longlisted for the Best Translated Book Award USA in 2018 for his translation of Bhaskar Chakrabarti's Things That Happen and Other Poems. In 2021, his translation of Taslima Nasreen's Shameless was shortlisted for the National Translation Award in the US. Besides India, his translations have also been published in the UK and the US in English and in several European and Asian countries through further translation. He is an associate professor of practice in the creative writing department at Ashoka University and the co-director of the Ashoka Center of Translation. He has started his own publishing house for translations called Chaurangi. Welcome, sir, and we are so honored to have you today. A, a lot of participants have, I'm sure, a lot of questions about the publishing sector, and especially you delving into starting a publishing house solely for translations. But before we go there, I would want to know, why did you begin translating? How did your journey begin, and why did you start translating?
Thank you for having me here. Hello to everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. It's Sunday afternoon, not the best time for a conversation. Good Bengalis like me are usually to be found sleeping away the afternoon after a traditional meal of pathar mangsho and bhat. But here we are. When I was in college, Gabriel Garcia Marquez won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And the prize was announced around November. And the very next year at the Calcutta Book Fair in January, several of his books were available. And out of interest, because he was possibly the first Latin American author whose name we had heard, other than people like maybe Pablo Neruda. I don't think Latin authors were very well known. So several of us picked up copies of his book. And then when I read 100 Years of Solitude, what struck me about it was that somebody had actually sat down and translated this book into English, that what we were reading was not what Gabriel Garcia Marquez had written. And while obviously we had all read translated books earlier, for the first time, it came home to me that translation is a distinct process from writing. Somehow before that, we had assumed that what we were reading was what the author had written, which of course speaks volumes for the quality of the translation, in which that you're willing to suspend your disbelief. But, we had read the Russian authors, most notably, and the German authors and French authors in English, or in some cases in Bangla, and just assumed that that was what they'd written. So for the first time, translation as a distinct process came home to me. And because I was studying literature at the time, I thought, let me find out what it's like. What does it mean to translate? Everyone's dabbled in writing in some form or the other in school, but translation, that's a new one. So I sat down and just tried my hand at translating something from Bangla, the only other language I knew, into English. And I enjoyed it so much that it sort of stayed with me. And on and off during my college years, I continued to translate small passages, mostly for my academic work. But what I did was I picked works of fiction and poetry to translate. I wouldn't say I did it with great skill, but like everything else, you acquire some muscles as you go along. Then after leaving college, we started a city magazine in Calcutta called Calcutta Skyline. And we used to publish a short story in translation every issue. And in the first year, I translated the stories for each of those issues. And that, I think, is how the translation muscles really were established.
So you would say that to get better at translation, you just keep on going at it, translate and translate more.
Absolutely. It's like any art form, music,
Mm,
dance, riyaz is everything.
definitely. Uh, One is like, what inspired to launch your publishing house?
Well, that's a long story, but also first I must point out that it's probably a bit of an overstatement to call it a publishing house.
Okay.
It's more of an experiment. What we are doing is, and if I may, I will just explain how this thing works. In recent times, there is a new, well, not so new anymore, but there is a technological development called print on demand, POD, where
Mm,
instead of printing copies of a book well in advance and storing them in a warehouse, you only print a copy in a batch of one every time somebody orders a copy. Now, that somebody could be a reader or a buyer, or it could be a bookshop ordering a copy or 5 copies, but you print it only then. The advantage with this is that you don't have to invest upfront in printing all those copies and then storing them somewhere, both of which cost money. You just print when there is a demand for it. So print on demand. It's a little more expensive to print that way. So the price also goes up as a result. But I'm using this print on demand mechanism, which has been set up on a platform called Stackbooks, based in the US currently. Stackbooks has been set up by Samit Patil, who is the founder of Scroll, where I run the books and ideas section. So that's the connection. And I thought that here's an opportunity then to start something that I envisage as a translators collective. The idea is that I am inviting translators, mostly young translators, to come and publish their works on with Chorangi Press. Chorangi Press is named after the first book I translated, which was titled Chorangi. That's sort of a hat tip to it. So I'm inviting them, or I have invited them, to come and publish on Chorangi Press, and using the same mechanism, which is that we list the book and it's available to any reader who orders a copy, whereupon it's printed and then delivered. So it doesn't go through bookshops and the traditional distribution system at the moment. This way, there are no costs upfront, and whatever the proceeds from the sales are go entirely to the translator in this case. So I've also requested the translators to work on out of copyright material so that they don't have to share the rights or the royalties with anyone else. So that is the thought behind this. And I'm hoping that young translators, initially from India, but maybe from other parts of the world also, will come and publish here, and their books will be available to readers around the world. That's the biggest perhaps advantage, which is that we are not limited to a particular geography.
mm. And I'm sure your own experiences as a translator has shaped your vision for the publishing as well. Because maybe you can share a little bit about your journey. How difficult was it to get published or recognized first?
Well, as a matter of fact, I think the timing was very good for me, very fortuitous, in that the story is, and this is a story that's been told many times, but I guess it does no harm in repeating it. The first story that I had translated for our city magazine was a story by the writer Shankar, Moni Shankar Mukherjee, very popular in among Bengali writers as Shankar. So that was in 1990. In 1992, uh, he asked me to translate Chorangi for him. At that point, translating works into English was not a big thing in India. There were very few translators to speak of. There had been some translations earlier in the 70s and 80s, but done mostly by, or many of them were done by academic translators. But those presses had mostly stopped functioning by then, and a new English publishing scene was just starting out in India. In the late 1980s, Penguin came to India in a partnership with Anand Bazar Group, and later on, of course, they started off on their own. Then HarperCollins came in some time later. So the multinational publishing companies were coming in for the first time after the just around or after the economic liberalization that took place in 19 that was announced in 1991. And then what happened was that initially they published in English, but soon the editors and publishers realized or remembered that India is home to a wealth of literatures in at least a dozen languages, right, if not more, and a long tradition of publishing really good books which have been both critically and popularly acclaimed. So unlike many other countries where you start from scratch, here was a ready-made wealth of books that only had to be translated into English to be published. But there weren't enough translators at that time. So 14 years after I had translated Chorangi and then given the copy to the writer and left Calcutta for Delhi, 14 years later, an editor at Penguin in Delhi called me and said, "Look, we'd like to publish Chorangi in translation." And the author said, "There is a translation already. He's forgotten the name of the translator, but he gave us a printout. And the printout has your name. So are you the one who did it?" So that was how it began. I wasn't even thinking of being published at that point or anything. But the timing was very good because for publishers, they wanted translations. And for me, I'd been working as a journalist all those years and was on the brink of midlife crisis, at which point you start wondering what you've been doing with your life and you wonder if there can be anything more meaningful. So it all worked out brilliantly. And the publishers, first Penguin, then HarperCollins and others, they were all very happy to publish translations at that point. So it wasn't difficult in that sense. The actual business, I mean, the actual translating a book, of course, has its own difficulties and challenges, but being published was actually not a problem at all. So it was very fortuitous in that sense. That was how it began. And after that, it's just gone on pretty much at an even pace ever since then. And I think sometime in December this year, my 100th translation will be published.
Wow.
So yeah, it's been what? That will mean about 18 years or so. Mm, so that's what it has. But in this period, of course, the publishing landscape has changed enormously. And from a time when publishers paid a lot of attention to serious literature, fiction, poetry, and so on, I think the publishing imperatives have changed greatly, and they are driven much more by the need to publish or pay attention to books that will sell very large numbers of copies. So the while they continue to publish serious fiction and poetry and translations, but that's in small numbers, and not they are not able to lavish as much attention on them as they used to before in terms of marketing, sales, and so on, because they are under much more pressure to deliver financial results. So unless you have a something like a Booker winner or an international Booker winner, so Heartland, for example, translated from Kannada, from Banu Mushtaq's Kannada by Deepa Bhasti, is probably going to sell more than 100,000 copies. And 3 years before this, 4 years before this, Tomb of Sand, Red Samadhi, Gitanjali Shri's Hindi novel translated by Daisy Rockwell, probably also sold almost an equal number of copies. But these are exceptions. As a rule, these days a translated book will be lucky to sell 3,000 copies. So I thought that, having translated all this time and got a sense of what publishing is like, it's time to start a small press that is dedicated only to translations. And it's starting out as a collective, as I mentioned. So we are not trying to replicate the big translating model, because the big translating model really has a kind of financial structure that makes it very difficult. And certainly someone like me who cannot invest any money is not going to be able to do anything along those lines. So this was the model that I picked. Again, fortuitously, a platform presented itself, platform called Stack Books. I've been thinking about it for a long time, but I could only implement it now. And now over the rest of this year and next year, I hope to have, by the end of 2026, I'm hoping to have at least a dozen titles out by various translators. So then
So
we'll,
have
yeah.
yeah. So have people approached you with their manuscripts currently? Have
Yeah, a couple of people have, but I've also explained to them that this is not like traditional publishing. So there's no advance, there's no no bookshops, nothing. So I think people are waiting to see what happens. But meanwhile, there are many young translators I know. Many of them I've actually taught myself at the university where I teach. So we are starting out with them, and maybe again, as I said, once we have a dozen or so or 10 books to show, then we might get more interest from a lot more translators and writers.
So has there been a huge, big surprise or a challenge in making that transition from a translator to a publisher or looking at manuscripts differently? Have you faced any
No, it's not
problems?
acquired that kind of scale yet. So I
Mm.
won't say there's a transition right now. If we actually happen to acquire that kind of scale and manuscripts start pouring in, then yeah, then my life's going to change all over again. And I'll have to figure out how to handle that. But for now, I'm able to do everything that I did and do this on top of it.
So when it comes to pitching their story for your publishing house, so what would be the advice that you would give people to pitch a story to you?
For me, well,
Yeah.
right now, as I said, ideally pick something that's out of copyright because we don't want to get into the complications of negotiating rights with authors or their estates. To figure out whether a work is out of copyright, this is slightly grisly, but we have to get into it, which is that you have to calculate from the year of the author's demise. And if the author has passed away more than 60 years ago here in India, so which means this year you should be looking at uh, I'm very sorry that we have to discuss this in such cold-blooded terms, but you should be looking at anybody who passed away before 1965. Their work then is out of copyright. It's in the public domain, and anybody can translate their works without requiring permission from anyone. And commercially speaking, then what happens is that any money that comes in from translating these works goes entirely to the translator. So that is advice. The first point of advice: pick a work like that. Two, therefore, pick. You could go with the classic writers because we have a global readership. It might be more useful to go with writers who are already whose names are already known. Because let's say a diasporic audience readership will not really know of new writers in India. In any case, we're not looking at new writers. So pick classic writers, pick their seminal works. It's fine if you're retranslating because if the translations have been done, say 10, 20 years ago, a new translation is very much due and can be accepted. And of course, it has to be. We are not even looking at very thick works. So I'm happy to publish anything that's about 12, 15,000 words, 20,000 words, and so on. So it is possible that you might be able to make a book out of something that would normally not make it as a book with an established publisher. So, for example, it could be something like 4 short stories. It could be a novella. It could be 3 essays. It could be a play. It could be a film script. It could be a bunch of letters. It might be interesting to diversify in form and not look at only the traditional novel or a full-fledged collection of short stories and so on. You can experiment more. I'm very open to experimentation. So if you say I want to give you a sample of the works of an author and I want to give you a variety of their works, I'm very happy to look at it. Because
Mhm.
my idea behind this also is to draw some interest from bigger publishers in these works. So, for instance, if somebody publishes with me on Chorangi Press and then a bigger publisher says, I'd like to publish this, I'm happy to hand it over to them and take it off Chorangi Press. So, I'm also interested in seeding the ecosystem, as it were, with works that normally might only languish in an editor's inbox.
That is interesting. So that opens up to a lot of new authors as well, people who want to experiment and see if translation is something that they want to do.
That's
What about the editorial process? So do you have people who are going to help in editing and
Yes. Yes. I mean, there are freelance editors whom I will
yeah,
rope in as and when required, but I'll be doing much of the editing myself also.
okay. So then we want to also know in this changing Indian publishing landscape, uh, to better support the translator, especially in languages, because uh, you are predominantly you translate in Bengali, in English. Are there other languages that you are comfortable with, and will you be open to those translations as
Oh,
well?
absolutely. Absolutely. This is certainly not limited to translations from Bangla at all.
Mm.
Initially, I'm looking at translations into English from all languages. But later on, if I can build a small team, then I'm also going to be looking at publishing translations into the non-English languages.
Mm. Yeah, so the opposite of it as well. Yeah. That would be lovely. And how do you balance it all? I think that is again the very big question that everyone has, from translator to an editor to a teacher, because we know that it's not a very money making process to be an author or a translator. So how do you balance all of them?
Um, I don't know. I think the one skill that I acquired when I used to be a journalist and worked in a room full of people all working very loudly and having conversations at the top of their voices, and many discussions going on and many interruptions, is to be able to switch between things very quickly without losing focus. So it's not as though I lose the thread when I move from one thing to another. So I think that has stood me helped me enormously and allowed me to simultaneously do many things. So I will be at the university. I have a class coming up in half an hour, but I have 20 minutes, so I will translate a page and then just switch into teaching. I don't need to sort of compose myself for an hour before I need to go to class and so on.
I think one people don't think about translation very often, because everyone kind of thinks about writing their own short story or poem or anything along those lines, creating your own art. But translation, again, finding there's a balance between retaining that the author's voice, and also uh, keeping your being true to yourself and your language. So how do you find that balance as well, fine tune that
Well,
you
look, I mean, I have never really harbored writerly ambitions in that sense. So I wouldn't say I have I mean, I'm sure I have a way of writing if I happen to be writing something that I need to without translating, which is quite difficult actually. But nevertheless, if I have to do it, like writing a book review or an essay or an introduction or something, I certainly don't write fiction or poetry. Um, so it's not as though I have a particular way of writing of my own that I need to be true to when I'm translating. My fealty is very much to the writer, or not even to the writer, to the text that I'm translating. And so you just learn, I think, to not insert yourself in there when you're writing. Having said that, that's only the conscious part of it. Subconsciously, I'm sure things happen. We can't help it. Which is why if you ask five translators to translate the same text, they will translate five different. I mean, they will produce five different versions. And even though you know that each of them is the same, it points back to the same text, there's still differences, right? So there is obviously something that the individual brings in there, and the individual translator is always making choices, what words to use, what phrases to use, and so on. But that those choices are always made with the intent of being true to the text, not with the intent of imposing a style or trying to write in a particular way.
Mhm. Also, the concept. So, when you are writing, translating multiple, so are you translating multiple books at the same time, or is it, do you have to take out space that, okay, let me complete a project? How does the entire process look like? So, when you're saying that by the end of a year, 100 books will be published. So, you have an entire list of books that you already know that you're going to work on.
Well, luckily, those remaining four books that will take me to 100 are already with the publishers, so there's no
Okay.
pressure, and I can make this announcement without feeling stressed about it, because unless the publishers renege, of course, and don't publish, but if they keep their word, then yeah. So primary translation, I will usually be working on only one text at a time, sometimes two, because sometimes what happens is that you hit a roadblock sometimes with the text, and then you just need to give it a little bit of a gap, and come back to it with a fresh mind. So then I switch to another text of a very different kind. It's I've done it. Not It's not very frequent, but it's not all that rare either. But otherwise, normally I'm working on only one text at a time, primarily. So doing the first draft, which is most of the work for me. And then, but simultaneously, I may be doing a third draft on another text, because what I sometimes like to do, if deadlines allow, is to translate something, create a first draft, and then put it away for a little time, so that I can come back to it after some time, maybe after 3 or 4 weeks, with more detachment. Otherwise,
Mhm.
you're very close to the text when you've just finished writing it, and you can't really acquire a critical look at it. So I will do a second or a third draft simultaneously. So I usually wake up early in the morning and I write then, but evenings I might use to rework an earlier draft. And sometimes I will also have to be looking at edits sent by an editor because the book's about to be published. So yeah, in that sense, sometimes I might end up working on 3 books at the same time, but each of them is in a different stage of its life cycle, heading towards publication.
I think that brings me to the idea of drafts. So, how many drafts does it take to reach your final goal?
Well, my normal number is 3 drafts. The first draft is the most painstaking one. In the second one, I focus on um, fixing the things that I left unfixed in the first draft, because sometimes there are some problems that stump you and you don't want to stop and spend your time over it, because then you lose that flow. When you're translating, it's very important to feel that you've captured the voice of the text, and once you've got that voice, you just want to bash on and get to the end. Otherwise, you might lose it. So the second draft is focused on fixing those things and looking at the clunky bits. Sometimes there are some clunky bits which you did not catch while you were translating. And then the third draft is really a final read. When I'm at that point, I'm reading it as a text in the language in which I've translated it, which is mostly English, but a little bit of Bangla also. So at that point, I'm not reading it as a translated book anymore. I'm just reading it as an English text or a Bangla text. And then if something still jumps out at me as very awkward, or a better option occurs to me, then I will do those. At that
So,
point, I mean, I'm not really trying. I'm assuming that I'm being faithful to the original text, so I'm not referring back to it then.
are other people involved in your when it comes to all these drafts? Do you ever open your work to criticism from outside initially in the initial process, that you look for reviews, or you look for friends, you give it to friends or family to check that text? Has Does it help, or do you even do it?
No, I don't do it, and I'll tell you why. I would have loved it if I could have done it on a systematic basis. I don't do it because it just puts pressure on other people. Everyone is busy. Everyone is doing their own stuff. They're busy writing their own thing or reading, and to at that point expect someone to drop anything and not just read casually, but read with close attention. 250 or 300 pages or 150 pages, the case might be, and tell me about it is a very it's not fair, very unfair demand. And mostly because these will either be friends or people you know, at least they'll also feel obliged to do something, and they'll feel guilty when they can't do it, and so on. So it's the same with me. If someone asks me, I very respectfully tell them that I wish I could have, but really I will not be able to do justice to this. So no, I don't. Sometimes the author wants to read it, so obviously the author does, but other than that, no, it's usually between me and the editor.
Okay. And have you ever paid for a freelancer to look at it, freelance editor to look at it? Never. Okay. And do you think it's a good idea to do it to everyone who's writing their first draft?
I think I don't think there's a one size fits all solution to that. If as a translator you feel that you want a collaborator to be involved, then you should do it. But of course, you have to find someone you can trust. If, however, you feel that you're really a solo player and you don't want ideas or suggestions at this point of time, and the editor anyway is going to come up with something, then you don't need to do it. So it's really a question of what suits you. Neither option is a good one or a bad one in itself. Both are possible and feasible.
Mhm. So now we'll open up to questions from the audience. The first question is, again, what factors have contributed, you think, to the immense improvement in the quality of literary translations today? If there's no bookshop to sell the books published at your press, how do the publications go out into the world?
Okay, these are
So,
two
two
separate
interesting
questions,
ones.
right?
Yeah, two separate ones.
Yeah.
So
So the
first, you can.
first, the first, of course, is that I think the fact that translations began to be published inspired a lot of young people, or older people for that matter. They realized that maybe something that they had dreamt of doing or wished they could do was now actually being done by others, and that it was feasible or possible that their own translations might also be published. So they were inspired, certainly. Mm, and good begets good. So if you have a bunch of good translations coming into the market, then obviously it's going to set standards, and it's going to lead to more people trying it. Also, young people have taken to it greatly. I suspect that many young people have found translating a very rewarding form of writing. Not everybody is able to come up with their own stories, but they love the language and they love the act of writing. They just don't know what to write. So translation is a fantastic opportunity in that sense, right? You already have a text, you have to rewrite it in a different language, and it brings into play all your writing skills. It's like singing a song. The notation's there, the lyrics are there, but you can still make something special out of it. And two people will do it differently, and one will be wonderful and the other will not. So translation is a tremendous opportunity. It is also great practice for budding writers. You want to write eventually, but musicians don't start composing on their own. Painters are made to copy famous works. Translation is a fantastic opportunity to hone your writing skills. I think all of these things have come into play, and also for young people, it perhaps is a quicker route to being published. I mean, I just edited a collection of stories of Mantos translated by my former students. So all of these people have been published at the age of 19, 20, 21. Of course, you can do it with your own work, but translations offer you a quicker and a more a more certain route to being published. So I think all of these things have inspired a lot more people to translate. And of course, they're reading better, they're writing better. So and of course, there are many more editors and publishers who are also helping them and telling them how to go about their work. So all of this has led to an explosion of high quality translations, which is really so fantastic, because it's so great to look around and see so many young people translating so well.
Coming to the second part, how do your publications go out into the
Yeah.
world when you don't have
So yeah,
bookshops?
so they are currently listed on the Charangi Press website, and also, well, there's only one publication so far. So as I said, that I'll be able to answer that question better in about a year from now. But the idea is that we will be pushing out those links to people through social media, through the website, through email and other forms. And of course, each of the translators will be doing their own work in informing others about them. So you just follow the link and you go and order the book, and then it is delivered to your doorstep in about a week's time. As I said, if we are able to work out the economics, we will also be taking some books to bookshops, maybe 10 or 15 bookshops around India to begin with, select bookshops in say 5 cities or 10 cities. So they will be available there as well.
So one question is, are you interested in other contemporary Bengali authors uh, while it comes to translated work? So are there any contemporary Bengali authors work you've read that you feel like, okay, you want to translate it?
All the time. I mean, I'm always reading contemporary Bengali authors and looking for works that resonate with me. And mind you, it's also important for a translator to pick the work that they are capable of translating. There are very many great books out there, but not every translator can translate every book. It's a matter of temperament. It's somewhere it's intangible, but you know that some works you can translate and others you can admire. So I look for contemporary writers all the time. In
I
fact,
think I'll add, sorry, please
I was just going
continue.
to say
Yeah.
that contemporary writers are the ones that attract the most attention, and they're the ones who win the prizes.
Yeah, so there is another question to this. Are there any exceptions to the out of copyright author plan for
Yeah,
your
sure. I'm
press
open to
publishings?
exceptions. I'm open to exceptions. That was just a framework for simplifying the process. But if there's a great book and the author is willing to be part of this experiment, then that's fine.
I think adding to this also is a question that a lot of people might have is how do you approach a contemporary author? How do you approach an author who's written in their own language that you want to translate their work? So has
Well,
how
the
do you
best way
start?
of convincing them is to actually translate a few pages and then be happy with it yourself and then share it with them. Because any author who then sees their work already translated, a small portion translated into another language, will be so enthralled of it, will be so happy to see it, that the chances of their saying yes are then much higher. Most authors, I would say almost all authors, love their work to be translated into other languages. So fundamentally, there
Um,
is no resistance.
so another very interesting question. What do you think English language readers miss most when reading a Bengali novel in translation? Besides the obvious idioms, does it lose a piece of its soul?
Well, that's why don't whoever asked this question, would you like to answer it for me by replacing Bengali with, say, Spanish or French? Do you feel you miss a piece of the soul of the work, French work or the Spanish work? If you don't, then there is no reason to assume you're going to miss the soul if the translator is good when it's translated from a non-English Indian language. All writing is translation. To begin with, an author is translating what's in their head. And how many times have you, as a writer, whenever whatever you're writing, it might be an email, it might be an application, it might be a love letter, how many times have you written something and said, this is not what I wanted to write? What I had in my head was different, right? So in any case, everything is translation. Um, you're forever dressing ideas in new clothes when you're translating, right? With new words that a new language provides. So certainly it's changed. It a work that exists in one language cannot exist in the same way in another language. But yet there is something universal in a great text that transcends the language. To reduce a work to a particular language and then say that that is where its soul resides would also perhaps be doing injustice to it, right? Every language can bring, so for example, you find a work beautiful in Bangla, write a beautiful book in English when you're translating it. Be true to the idea of beauty. Now, the idea of beauty may reside in different combinations of words and sounds in English compared to Bangla or Malayalam or Tamil or French or Japanese or Korean. But the idea exists. So find the words that take you to the same idea, right? Um, I think if we keep wringing our hands over the fact that you're not going to be able to capture everything that work can do in one language in another, which is true, you can't. But that is not a problem, because you can also do many things with the work in the new language that perhaps could not have been done in the original language. So as long as you're true to its intent and beauty and rhythm and music, nothing prevents you from doing it.
Mhm. So here the question is more to do with how involved are the authors in the translation process, the original author. So do they influence the process? Do you have to be in touch with them if you're translating someone whose work is who's a contemporary author? So how involved are they?
It varies greatly from author to author. Some like to be more involved than others, but most nobody is involved to the point where they're peering over your shoulder, metaphorically, if not literally, at everything that you're writing. Many translators will sometimes ask questions. They will ask their author questions, which is always useful if the author can provide answers. Sometimes even a good translation might miss a certain nuance that the author had intended, and authors can be very helpful in pointing out those nuances, because great literature does not exist only in the dictionary meanings of the words, right? It is also in what is between the lines, what your imagination fills in as a reader. And all translation is an act of very close readership, but no two people are going to read a text the same way. So it's possible that the translator will read the text a little differently from the way the author might read it. So sometimes it helps to talk to the author. But some authors feel that no, now it's out of my hands, let the translator do what they will. And they may read the final version or not even that. It varies, as I said, greatly.
Mhm. Another question is, how do I train to translate better? Any books/courses that you would recommend?
Well, I would say don't read manuals. Practice a lot, practice incessantly, practice obsessively. If you want to read something, read some of the translation memoirs that there are not too many in India that have come out, none at all that I can think of. But there are translation memoirs that translators in the West have written, and you could profitably read some of those. Not so much to consciously learn as to let those ideas seep into you by a process of osmosis. Because being a translator is also a certain mode of living. It is not just about the nuts and bolts of how to tighten the screws or how to fix part A to part B. It is also a way of existence. It is also a way of interacting with the world. And many of these things are revealed in the process of reading these memoirs by translators from the West. So, for example, certainly read Gregory Rabasa's set of essays called "If This Be Treason." It's fantastic reading. There are many other many such books. You just need to Google them, translation memoirs or translators memoirs, and you'll find quite a lot of good ones. There's a great book by Kate Briggs called "This Little Art," which can be read with great with for a real enjoyment of the book, but also in the process you learn a lot unconsciously.
Mm. This question says, how do you decide if a new author is best fit as a translator for a certain work? Mm.
Best fit for a translator, meaning whether to translate that book or not.
No, whether how do you decide if a new author is best fit? I think that if the author would be a good translator, I think that is the question,
Whoever's asked the
Malini.
question,
Yeah.
would you like to just sort of elucidate a
If
bit?
you want to explain a little bit, Malini is still here. Okay, we can move on to the next one if Malini wants to
Sorry,
explain.
Arnava,
Yeah.
what was the second book that you mentioned, please?
This Little Art by Kate Briggs.
Thank you.
We can move to the next question. What is your process? Do you translate by hand or use a computer or both?
No,
Any
no, I
software you've explored?
no, no. I translate on a computer, and I use on my Mac. I use a piece of software called IA Writer, which has no bells and whistles. It is literally like writing on a blank sheet of paper. It doesn't let you do any of the fancy things that something like Microsoft Word lets you do, or that you can even do on Google Docs. So as a result, I'm not distracted by all those things. It's just the letters appeared in a very simple font, straightforward on a white sheet. I just split my screen into two halves. I put the PDF of the book on the left hand side, and the right hand side of the screen is the blank sheet of I writer, and I just keep typing away there. And every night before I go to sleep, I copy everything that I've typed and I email it to myself.
That's very interesting. So, I think coming back to how people can approach you. So, how when they're sending a synopsis or they're sending a cover letter, so what are you looking for when a new translator, new author is approaching you
Approaching me for what?
for translation? Like they want to send in a translated work, a short story, a novella, whatever
Okay,
it
just
is.
for an opinion, or now for
No, to
possible.
get published. Yeah, to get
Same, it's
published.
the same. Whether it's for an opinion or to get published, um, I'm just looking for something that's really unique,
Mm.
that I enjoy reading, and I feel that wow, this is something new.
And do they approach you with the entire translation? So how much of the work that you do you want to read before you can
Well,
say, okay, go ahead?
if it's a novel, even a sample is fine. If it's a short story, I'd like to read the entire short story.
Mm. And okay, so we have another. Do you read a text multiple times before you start writing? What is the process before you start putting words on paper?
No, in fact, increasingly, I don't read it even once. I mean, I read a little bit, and then I'm convinced that I'm going to want to translate this, and then I read it as I'm translating, because that way I retain the freshness of the reading. If I've read it once or twice too many times, then it becomes a little jaded, and sometimes the translation can become tired as a result of it. I want to be able to retain the excitement I have of discovering a new text.
Malini's explained herself. So, the debut author translator who does not have a proven track record, how do you decide whether this person can translate a certain piece of work? I think they have to send in a piece with
Yeah,
question.
yeah. I mean, I don't care who they are. I just want to read what the work that they've done.
Mm,
If you look around, you will find that many brilliant translations are first translations. Mm, every
yeah.
translator started somewhere, and many translators produced magnificent translations the very first time that they translated. So, track record or experience is great, but the lack of it doesn't matter.
One is where can one send in the work to you? An email or website?
Yeah, that's a good question. You can email me at chorungipress@gmail.com.
Sorangipress@gmail.com.
Yeah, I'll just type that out for you.
Yes.
Meanwhile, you can continue with the question.
I think yes. So another thing that people genuinely want to know is that this entire translation process, because until and unless someone sits with the translation, and that's so interesting that you don't read the entire text, you just read a few chapters or a few chapters or some excerpt and you start translating. So this entire process seems a lot foreign to people because they're thinking, okay, how do you take new authors? Do you take people who are seasoned? So where does it start for you as well? That if you look at a new author and only a sample chapter, how do you trust that work for what it is, or do you need more than that has been given? What is the time frame of the entire thing? That once you get that sample chapter, how much time will you give them before it gets to publishing, to editing, to publishing? So what is the entire process?
Yeah, so reading a sample will tell me that yes, I'd like to read the whole thing. Of course, the
Hmm.
whole thing has to meet the expectation set by the sample. All I'm saying is that the translator doesn't have to finish the entire work to
Hmm.
approach. How much time it will take depends on the translator. Some people work quickly, some don't. So again, I don't want to pressure them. But it's good to remember that if you take too long, then the publisher, and that's not just me, any publisher loses interest. They move on to other books. So it's good to keep the iron hot and keep striking at it.
So, what is the ideal timeline according to you?
Depends on the length of the book. But if someone's given me, say, 3 chapters of a book that will run to, say, 250 pages, and 3 chapters might run to maybe 30 pages, then I would love to have the manuscript within the next 3 to 6 months.
Mm. And by now, how many you've published one book till now, and how many do you have in your repertoire
There are
that
about
you?
4 or 5 in the works.
Mm.
Yeah, and as well as we've just announced a special series, which are not translations, but which are 5 volumes of interviews with translators around the world, which are actually part of the Harshaniam podcast. They currently exist in the form of podcasts. We're putting them to words and going to be publishing them in 5 volumes, 20 interviews each volume.
Wow. Well, so when is that coming out? That seems so interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We'll start this year and then go on to next year.
Okay. So all over the world, every translator
Yes,
that we
yes,
know of.
yes.
Yeah.
This is entirely the person who runs the podcast. It is entirely their achievement.
Okay. So, yesterday we had an interesting conversation about how, a book, a translated book, and you have also spoken about it, that one translated book, if they win a prize, they end up only one, that book blows up, and it doesn't trickle down to every translated work out there.
Yeah.
So, what do you think works out? Like, you have seen in 81 publications, more than 81 publications right now. What do you think works and sticks with people? What do you think doesn't work? So, do you have your own idea of the market now?
I wish I did. No, market is a changing thing anyway. What
Yeah.
worked 2 years ago might not work now,
Mm,
so it's very hard to say. And also, I don't think it's a good. I mean, publishers need to publish to a market, perhaps. Although that's not what I intend to do at Chorangi Press. I'm not going to be looking at publishing to a market. I'm just going to be looking at publishing good books. Mm, so the moment you start trying to guess what the market will want, I think you're doomed. You are then going to start working to a formula, right? And what happens these days is that because of algorithmic sales on Amazon and so on, you start getting a lot of data, and that data only makes you do more of the same. It doesn't allow you to go off in a different direction, which means you cannot find new things, you cannot take chances. So this whole marriage of publishing and big money is spelling the doom for really interesting literature, which is why I wanted to do this press, which is not tied into the idea of money at all, because it's a POD platform. It does not require upfront investment, so there's you can't lose money on this. I mean, theoretically, if I were to publish a book of which no copies are sold, and that will not be the case, but I'm just giving you an extreme hypothetical situation, even there the publishing company doesn't lose any money because there's no money spent on it in the first place, right? So the moment you're freed of that, you can then start going out and doing really exciting things. So I would say that if you're a translator, do not worry about whether your translation will find a market or not. Just translate a book because you love it and you think more people should read it.
That's so interesting because social media nowadays plays such a huge role for authors as well. There are people who have told us that, if publishers have outright asked them, what is your following if you want to write a children's book? So for you, do you feel insecure about the rise of social media? Do you think, or are you a little bit aware of it that, okay, I need to be present on social media, that I need to make some exceptions and changes? Do you
Well,
feel like that?
I do my bit in getting the word out, but I absolutely abhor the fact that writers are expected to market their books themselves on social media. That is not their skill. They are writers. They should be spending their time thinking of how to write better and indeed write better, write more books, write better books. Big publishers have now turned that idea around of asking authors to market their book. They're now going to people who are already big on social media and saying, write a book. You've already got your audience. So you can see where publishing is going, right? That is not how you serve the cause of literature. That is not, forget literature, that's a big term. That is not even how you create books that will last, right? Because today's social media star is going to be a husband tomorrow. So you are actually encouraging ephemeral writing, things that just have an opening weekend and move away from there. Um, it's also tragic that authors are expected to work on their spare time. Imagine someone who's making a film telling an actor, "Hey, tell you what, don't give up your day job. Just come and act in the evenings." That's not going to work, right? And if they are expected to work during their working hours, normal working hours, then they're expected to be paid for those working hours, right? Unfortunately, that is not the case. As the writer, you get between 7.5% to 10% of the cover price of your book. That is all that the publishing company. Now, you complain about this to a publisher, and they will tell you, "We have so many costs, blah blah, etc." Fine, you have so many costs, but you would not be there without writers, and yet you put writers at the bottom of the chain. So it's not the individual's fault. It is just that the whole structurally publishing is doomed. So at Chorongi Press, for example, the way the economics works is that there is a cover price and there is a printing price, right? The difference between the cover price and the printing price is usually about 60% of the cover price. So printing is 40% and the cover price is 60. The end Out of that 60%, the platform will take 10%. So you're left with 55%. The entire 55% of every copy sold will go to the translator. All of it. Not 7.5%, not 10%. 50% or more will go to it, the translator. Now, I'm not saying that will pay the translator's bills, but at least they will feel that I am being recompensed for my work in a more fair way, right? So that it enables me to maybe put more of my time and effort into this. So I'm not claiming to be a path breaker or a genius or anything. I'm just saying that the very structure of publishing needs to change to accommodate, to bring the author and the translator, where there is a translator, to the top of the pile, to the top of the heap, right? The company makes most of the money today. The publisher's margin is something like 40%. The distributor makes 30% or so. The bookseller makes 20% or so. Everybody makes more money than the author. And yet, if there were no author, there would be no book. It's insane.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, that's so interesting. Like to, and there has been no demand to increase it from the author's side. Like there are so many collectives that authors do make at the end of it, right? And they get together, and even then, there is no conversation about increasing that percentage from a seven
It's
to an eight.
No, no. I mean, there is sometimes an agent will bargain it upwards for you to
Yeah.
10%, and then there'll be cascading rates. If you sell more than 5,000 copies, then for every copy sold, you get 12.5%, and so on. But all that is predicated on volumes, right? That in order to make really good money, your book must sell 100,000 copies or 200,000 copies. Now, is a is a book a bad book because it sells 1,000 copies? Right? There can be many reasons why it doesn't sell more copies than that. So at least we have to ensure a fair compensation. So ironically, there are more grants for translators than there are for writers. Not in India, but globally. So if you were publishing with an indie press in the UK, for example, right? Let's say a press like Tilted Access or like and other stories, who were the publishers of Heartlamp. Now, here's the interesting thing. For a book published with and other stories, you might, as the author, get an advance of anywhere between 500 and 1,000 pounds. It's an indie press. They don't expect to sell more than 1,000 copies in normal course, maybe 2,000. So your advance against royalties will be between 500 and 1,000 pounds. If your book is something like, say, 50,000 words, the translator will get a translation fee of 5,000 pounds. Right? So initially, the translator actually gets more money because there's that fee for translation in the West. And very often that fee doesn't come from the publisher, but it comes from grants that the Arts Council and Penn UK and others offer. Right? In India, of course, we don't even have that. The only exception is that now at Ashoka University, where I teach, we've started the Ashoka Center for Translation, and we now give out translation grants for the books that we pilot. Not anything like the rates that you'll get in the West, but far better than the rates than you'll get in India. So, for example, someone who translates a 100,000 word book can expect a grant of say 200,000 rupees. So these grants are what can keep translators going, and we hope to be. My interest is focused on translators, although of course if there were no writers to begin with, there would be no translators either. So we also must not think only of ourselves and say, never mind, don't think of the authors at all. So yeah, this community of writers and translators definitely needs to find or needs to be given other ways of keeping themselves going. Some time ago, I think 2 or 3 years ago, in the UK, they did a survey uh, to discover that author earnings were dropping significantly, and that caused alarm for them, not because they are great supporters of literature, this was the government, but because it meant that if author earnings were going to drop so much, then only well-off people would write books, right? Those who don't need the money from their books. And that would severely narrow the range of the kind of literature that they would provide. And that in turn would stop making the UK a leader in soft power in the world. UK as the font of fine literature, which gives them so much influence and clout around the English speaking territories of the world, would start diminishing, especially because something like the US is a big competitor and has more money, all told. So that was what they were worried by. So it's interesting that you actually have economic and political considerations that lead to alarm bells ringing because authors' earnings are shrinking.
Mm.
So there probably needs to be a way to keep authors and translators going at their work that lies outside the profit and loss account of publishing companies. So 100, 200 years ago, it used to be patronage, right? You had rich people giving away money to artists. Maybe in the same way, because the world is so now, there are a handful of people who are so obscenely rich now, they could give away some of their money to artists and writers so that, uh, you know, who are the people you will remember 100 years from now? It's not going to be the politicians, right? It's going to be the poets and the artists. But the world's economic structure is not tilted towards ensuring that this community thrives. That needs to
Also,
change.
Yes, before the time is already up, but the Ashoka grant that you spoke about, if someone wants to apply for it, what is the process?
Well, it's not a regular grant in the sense of applying for it. It
Hmm.
is given out to translators of projects that we manage. So we create these projects in consultation with publishers, and then we find translators or translators apply. But that's now we've only been around for a couple of years or so. Going forward, maybe we will be able to create a corpus for grants that translators can apply for.
Okay, thank you so much. The time is up. People can stay back, the people from the FDC. But thank you so much for giving your time. I feel like we've learned so much about translation, about the entire industry and how it works. Because we don't get a lot of chance to talk to translators. And whenever we do, it's so interesting to know that there's so many grants abroad. But what about all the Indian languages that everyone is, taking up sticks ready to hit people for these languages, but what about giving grants to people and getting and celebrating these languages?
Yeah.
So
I
thank you.
just have a thought. People are so hung up nowadays that those who come into their cities or states should speak their own language, but they don't because they're from other parts of the world. Make them read translations. That is how they will fall in love with those languages and want to learn it. How
Mm,
about thinking of that?
yeah. Thank you so much, Anova.
Thank you
We
very much for having
talk
me.
will be
Thank you,
with
everyone.
the, yeah, thank you
Yeah.
so much.